And there goes another month, which means another bundle of delightfully frightful books has been knocked off of the ye old TBR list this month. And despite February being the shortest month of the year, I am happy to say that I read more in February than I did in January. I'm very pleased about that because I got my hands on some absolute stellar gems of some horror books that I cannot wait to gush over in this video. Of course, I had a couple of mehs on the reading list, but we'll go ahead and take a closer look at what I'm talking about in just a moment. Hey there, and welcome back into my channel. If you're new here and we haven't been formally introduced, I'm Howie. I'm a professional reader of tarot and astrology. I'm a chronic non-reader of horror fiction in my spare time, which is why I'm sure you're here today, and I'm a huge planning enthusiast. Because let's face it, something around here needs to help me keep all these crazy trains of thoughts running on the tracks. In today's video, we are essentially doing my February 2026 reading wrap-up, and I've got 5 whole books to talk about in this video, so without further ado, let's dive in and take a closer look at what was on my TBR for the horror genre. Now, for those of you who were here for my January reading wrap-up, you already know what book number 1 in February is going to be. And when I say number 1, I just mean the first book that I read. I'm going to be presenting these in the order I read them, not necessarily in the order of preference. We'll talk about preferences at the end of the video. And let me tell you, this one is going to be a solid contender for my favorite book of the month. Possibly my favorite book of all time so far. February just came in swinging with this one. And I kicked off February with Ghost Eaters by Mcleod Chapman. What a wild ride. And apparently the 20s revival is all about fungal mycelium horror in our fiction, folks. Because this was one of 2 books that I read in February that have some sort of fungal body horror aspect to it. This was intense. This is a heavy book. I'm gonna warn all of you right now. I am obsessed with this book, and this book actually ended up in my reading journal. Now, I don't actually keep a traditional reading journal with, book reviews and, 5 out of 5 stars or whatever. I keep a creative junk journal for my readings. And so when a book really speaks to me, and I mean like sits with me, like I said, haunts me for days on end, this book is going to live rent-free in my head for many, many moons to come, I will sit down and just scrapbook. Stickers, scrapbook paper, paper ephemera, and I will just create an artistic spread about my experience reading through the book.
The story of Ghost Eaters follows our main character, Erin, after she tragically loses her ex-boyfriend to a crippling drug addiction. Unfortunately, Erin had a very toxic, very codependent relationship with Silas, and so she falls into a swirling pit of grief, regret, and a deep sense of responsibility for his death that causes her to crack. Erin's had her own fair share of struggles with drug addiction, from her party phases between her, Silas, and their 2 best friends. And so she falls into a deeply depressive episode.
So as Erin spirals worse and worse and worse out of control, she is introduced by one of her friends to a brand new drug on the market. It's a next level psychedelic shroom with a next level experience that no other drug has been able to give a user before. And they call it Ghost. And that is because Ghost allows the user to see and even communicate with ghosts. However, there is, of course, a price to pay besides the addictive qualities. The ghosts can see you back, and the ghosts can smell the ghost in your blood. And so the supernatural elements that are stacked on top of this gut-punching commentary are truly terrifying, horrific, and downright gross sometimes. The language that Chapman uses to describe the hallucinogenic scenes that our main character experiences, it is beautifully and disgustingly well written. I also adored his use of metaphors, especially when describing and setting the scene for Erin's relationship with her ex. Ghost Eaters eventually reveals a absolutely crazy twist and gives you a balls to the wall climax at the near end of the book, which culminates in an ending that still haunts me and leaves me pondering on just how extreme escapism can manifest and root itself in our bodies. So if any of y'all want to click off this video now, believe me, I will not be insulted. As long as you go pick up this book and start reading it immediately, I will absolutely forgive you. By all means, read this dang book. Okay. Now that I'm back down from Cloud 9 after gushing over Ghost Eaters, let's move on to the next book that I read in February. And that book happens to be Model Home by Rivers Solomon. And I swear I didn't just get this book just because the cover is neon green, okay? I read the blurb at the back, I promise. And I was very excited about this book. Now, unfortunately, this book suffers from... It needs a trigger warning, but the trigger warning is the twist ending, and therefore if you give the trigger warning, you are going to spoil the entire book. So, needless to say, by the time I finished it, I wasn't liking it. It was not hitting for me. This was definitely a huge miss. I also went in expecting something different. I was expecting something far more supernatural. I talked about this before. Life has enough horror and terror in it. I would like to escape that reality, so give me horror that is absurd, off the walls, over the top, supernatural, monsters and ghosts and ghouls and all kinds of mythical creatures. I will say the author's writing is great. There were some beautiful pieces of poetic prose that I ended up recording in my commonplace book that just, it struck a few chords. It was truly like music. I will give them that. However, the story was a miss. And so the story of Model Home is about 3 siblings who grew up in a very well-to-do gated community in Dallas, Texas, as a Black family. And our main character on top of that is also gender fluid and non-binary. And so there are heavy themes, the author is queer and Black as well, that deal with racism, classism, and queerness. And honestly, those topics are what made me excited about this book. I need more queer literature in my library. Let's face it, we all do. And so what happens is the siblings need to return to their parental home because their parents have passed away. And of course, the investigators have their own theories and their own stories of what happened, but the siblings, they don't believe it. There were situations and happenings in that home they grew up in that just don't add up to what the investigators are saying happened to their parents. And so as much as they tried to separate and leave their childhood home behind, now they must come together to figure out what exactly happened here and what really happened in that home that they grew up in. And here is where that trigger warning was really, really needed. But again, it spoils the ending, so unfortunately, there's not much more I can say about that. I will say, I went into this thinking it was going to be a haunted house. It sounded like a haunted house. Honestly, the first few pages really grabbed me. The language was beautiful, it was poetic, and it was spooky. Despite the fact that our main character was speaking about their past, it felt real. I felt like I was there with them, full of terror, full of fear of the unknown, full of uncertainty of what was going to happen to me and what was happening around me. So beautiful writing. Just the story itself and the ending did not hit where I was hoping it would. Another theme from this book deals with intergenerational trauma, about how trauma within a family is passed down from generation to generation. And there is a kind of side arc going on in this story that really slaps you in the face with that theme. I'll put it that way. And finally, I will say the ending did make me go back to the beginning of the book. I do like when books do this. Reread literally the first 2 lines And my stomach dropped and my spirit just broke. Those are some heavy, heavy first lines when you know what the twist ending is at the end. Whew, very heavy. Now, after I finished Model Home, I really felt like I needed a bit of a palate cleanser, just something that I felt a little safer reading that would settle in the stomach, you know what I mean? And so I went back to Darcy Coates, and I went with The Haunting of Gillespie House, which, as it turns out, is a novella with 3 short stories attached to it. So I got 4 for the price of 1. Pretty cool. Now, I will say The Haunting of Gillespie House, which is the novella, left me wanting more. I really feel like Coates could have stretched this story out and added more detail, more lore to it to make a full novel. So my one complaint about that story is I just wanted more. Just give me more spooks, please. But The Haunting of Gillespie House is about our character named Elle, who is hired to watch the Gillespie house for the Gillespies. So they are taking a month-long sabbatical to work on their marriage, and so they need somebody to watch their, of course, very old, a very large mansion, and Elle needs the money, so why not? It doesn't take long for things to start going weird. And they go weird and they go south very fast. So Elle is plagued by scratching in the walls and creaking floorboards and a spooky as heck basement with a giant iron skull in it that just unsettles her to her bone. She starts having these weird dreams, and eventually she discovers a secret that the Gillespies were trying to keep from her. And this leads her down a slippery slope into the history of the house. And it culminates in a pretty darn epic scene that just left me like biting my nails, hoping that it would turn out well in the end. That felt rushed. I really wanted to experience more of her tension as she went night by night by night in this house. But all in all, it was a joyful read. I had a good time. Now, as for the short stories, I will say not all of them hit on all 8. The first 2, they were okay. The second one, I will say, I wasn't a huge fan of, in fact. The second one, the only thing I really liked about it was the ending. The ending's prose was very creepy. It had that classic Coates tension building to it. But again, it's the end of the short story, so if the rest of it doesn't work out, then the story overall kind of falls apart. It was the third one that really sat with me, though. So the third story is about mannequins. And I know a lot of people out there just don't like mannequins, and I thought, the Twilight Zone did mannequins pretty creepily. I don't know how Coates does it, but Coates took that to the next level. Coates took the OG Twilight Zone mannequins episode and just cranked the volume up to 11. It was deeply unsettling, super well written, and the fact that you go through multiple point of views in just one short story, and each one is just tense and riddled with paranoia, I mean, that's just expert writing right there. I didn't think I would like it. I'm not usually a huge fan of short stories because I want to get involved in a story. I want to know the lore. I want to know the why. I want to get to know my characters. But that last one, A+. S tier, even. If I can give a short story S tier rank, I will give it S tier rank. Now, obviously, I was feeling pretty good about the books I had chosen for February. I was absolutely riding high on Darcy Coates, and I was ready to keep the ball rolling, keep that momentum going, keep the tension extra tense. And so I ended up picking up a bit of a wild card for my next read in February, and that was The Dark Between the Trees by Fiona Barnett. And I mean, look at the cover. Look at the cover. That's an attractive cover. So reading the blurb on the back of this book, because I had never heard of this book prior to visiting the bookstore, I anticipated spookies, creepy crawlies, long-legged beasties in a haunted forest, supernatural stuff. I live for that. So I was very excited to get into this book, and maybe I had too high expectations because I almost DNF'd this book. This book was not fun. Oh, this book was difficult. The first 50 pages were a slog to get through, and I will explain shortly. So the story of The Dark Between the Trees actually takes place across two separate timelines. You have the modern timeline, which involves a group of 5 women going out into the woods on an expedition, and they are led by Dr. Alice Christopher, who is a historian obsessed, and I mean to an unhealthy degree, obsessed with discovering evidence of what happened to a small squadron of soldiers from the 1600s, of which there are scattered and inconsistent accounts where one of those soldiers reportedly, allegedly, survived something in the woods, lived to tell the tale, and that tale kind of just circulated through history, through centuries, and now Dr. Alice Christopher would like to prove that something is wrong with this section of the woods, this forest. And so you jump back to 1643 and you relive this squadron's battle, trying to survive against an unseen force that appears to stalk them through this unsettling and shifting forest. And so these stories eventually culminate in a climax at the end of the story that kind of goes off the walls into like cosmic level horror. And I know I said I almost DNF'd this book. So let me just start by saying it did start to grab my attention. Once I made it up that very steep and very long drawn out initial introduction to what was going on, I was able to find my rhythm with the book, and I did enjoy the story overall. And I gotta say, I loved the ending. But, big but, capital B, our author, Barnett, really seems to be allergic to verbs. In the first couple of pages, I counted exactly 9 uses of the combination said character. 9 in 2 pages. And Barnett uses this combination even when what is being said is very obviously a question. Asked would have been lovely. Change up the rhythm a little bit. What's wrong with retorted? What's wrong with thought out loud? What's wrong with questioned? The writing was so repetitive. I'm not gonna lie, I actually had to Google if this author used AI to write this story. And I don't think they did, but it is their first book. So I gave them that. Kept that in mind. This is their first book that they published, but I gotta say, the writing is a bit clunky for my taste. Let's get creative with our verbs, please. Good Lord, if I have to read one more line that ends in said character, I'm going to lose my mind. And then there was one. The final book I read in February. And I promise you, I don't just like it because I started reading it after The Dark Between the Trees. The prose in this next book is just oozing with visceral beauty and disgusting tension and discomfort. This author is an expert at weaving together images of dream-like terror and supernatural Gothic horror with just the written word. I was incredibly uncomfortable reading this book from start to finish. It goes places, and I couldn't put the damn thing down. This book is just that fucking good. And this book is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Morena-Garcia. And I cannot sing the praises of this book enough. This is another book that proves that the 20s is all about this fungal body horror trend. Apparently that's just my new shtick. I am the fungal body horror guy, so if you got any mushrooms doing some freaky stuff in a horror book, then I obviously need to read it, because, like, this was off the walls crazy. So, of course, the story. The story of Mexican Gothic is about our bold and brazen, fun-loving Noemi, who receives a very concerning letter from her cousin, who is recently married into the British Doyle family, and they live in the Mexican countryside, but in an isolated, very dilapidated old manor. And so Catalina's letter is jarring. It is desperate. It is pleading for Noemi to come save her from the Doyles. So Noemi packs up her bags and visits High Place, the Doyles' family manor. And from the minute she walks in that manor, which is just moldering, falling apart, shabby, full of rot and decay, even an unseen rot that just creeps into your veins and your mind, you know shit is gonna hit the fan in this book. And the Doyles definitely have more than their fair share of skeletons hiding in their closet. And the thing about this book is that Gothic slow burn. Morena-Garcia takes her time unpacking those skeletons, bone by creepy bone. The way this author writes the dream-like psychedelic sequences is captivating, to say the least. Her way with words, just like I said, I could not put this book down. Now, there are some trigger warnings with this book. There is implied intent to commit sexual assault. I will say that. There is no completion of that act, but if that type of theme, if that type of innuendo makes you uncomfortable, you might want to skip out on this book. And then, of course, there's the whole idea of the fungal body horror that kind of creeps in every now and again through the pages. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's another reason maybe you want to skip out on this book. I truly, truly, truly encourage you to pick up Mexican Gothic, though. This was a fabulous read. It was recommended to me by a really good friend of mine, and I am so pleased that I closed out my reading month on this note. This was a strong, strong book, and this is another one that ended up in my reading journal. So even though the book kind of opens with the Doyles are creepy, the Doyles are creepy, the Doyles are creepy, the way the different family members act, behave, their mannerisms, the little innuendos, the little words between the lines of what they say and how they interact with Noemi, I still found the twist and the ending to be surprising. I'm very pleased to say that the supernatural elements here were super satisfying. The ending overall was super satisfying, but bittersweet. For me, anyway, I was contemplating this when I finished the book. I was talking about it with my friend that recommended it to me, and I feel like the ending's a little bittersweet. I can't say more than that because I don't want to spoil what's actually going on and what happens in this book. Y'all, you gotta read this book. Please read this book. Read this book so we can talk about it. But yeah, bittersweet ending, but overall, great, great read. This is S-tier material. Highly recommend. Overall, February was one hell of a month to be reading horror fiction. I had a fantastic journey from start to finish, despite the fact that I had those two books that didn't really hit on all 8 for me. Overall, Ghost Eaters as the start and Mexican Gothic as the finish made up for everything else in between. I'm going to live forever, coast on that feeling of finishing those 2 books. Those are absolutely going to be heavy, heavy contenders when I do a final tally at the end of 2026 for my favorite books overall. So in case you can't guess, my 2 biggest recommendations from this video would be, of course, Ghost Eaters by Chapman and Mexican Gothic by Morena-Garcia. These were wild rides, and like I said, they do deal with some pretty heavy gut-punching subject matter, so reader beware. But if that type of discomfort is what you crave in your horror, by all means, go for it. Go forth and multiply. Let people know of the gospel that is these two books, please. And also, I just need more people to talk about these books with. So thank you all so much for tuning in to this reading wrap-up. I hope you gained some inspiration of what to add to your TBR list in 2026, and I am very excited to see you at the end of March with another reading wrap-up. Unfortunately, my current book that I'm working on, I do not have it within arm's reach, so there will be no sneak peek on March's video today. Sorry, folks. In any case, don't forget, as always, to take care of yourselves and each other, especially in times like these. Bye-bye.